Hello. Hello, literate people. 50% of you can read. 52, 54. It's going up. It's called knowledge. It's called learning. If I could go back in time, I'd go back in time and teach you how to read as a child. I'm speaking to the 43% of you who can't read. Today is book club for Stephen King's 11/22/63. This is a pretty beefy book. A little fatty like your liver. Delicious at the beginning and end, but could have used a bit of an edit for the middle. My copy was, let's see, 849 pages. I guess that includes an afterword. Embarrassingly, when I first finished the book, I thought I had finished the book at final notes and didn't realize there was another chapter. I'll explain, but at the end it has an epilogue called Citizen of the Century 2012. For some reason, I thought it was like a preview of a different book, so I just ended at the second last chapter, and I actually thought that was a great way of ending the book. And I actually think I prefer it, but I did actually read the last chapter. I've yet to finish it. I plan on it still, though. I'm really enjoying it. Oh, if that's the case, I am going to be talking about the ending a lot, because I think a lot of your enjoyment of the novel hinges on, I guess, two things, the love story and the ending. So if you don't care about spoilers, you can stick around if you want to experience the ending for yourself. I won't be offended if you go take a walk. To Marissa, I just finished a couple of hours ago, not even. I finished earlier in the week and then only realized a couple days ago that I didn't actually finish it. I did that thing where I mostly read the book, but then I also listened to it. I also had it on Audible, so I could like go on the treadmill and just listen to the book at times. Call me simply, give me all the spoilers. Some people are like that. I don't get it. Don't you want some? It depends how invested I am in something, whether or not I guess it ruins it for me to know how it's going to end. Anyway, I guess I should poll people. How many of you did you read 11/22/63? I'm just going to do yes, no. Watching the mini-series with James Franco doesn't count. I did read a little post about some of the differences between the miniseries and the book, but I don't know enough about the show to actually get through it. I've never read Stephen King. Would this one be worth it? Okay, we'll get into it. A lot of people do like this book a lot and hold it up as an example of one of King's better modern novels, let's say, or more recent novels. This came out in 2011, I think, just before the 50th anniversary of JFK's assassination. It's pointed to as one of King's, better novels written in the last, 15, 20 years. Because a lot of the examples you'll hear of King are, read The Shining, or read Carrie, or read a bunch of books he wrote when he was doing a lot of drugs in the 80s. And hey, a lot of those books are really good. This book hasn't changed my opinion of Stephen King in that he's an incredibly creative guy, really interesting ideas for stories. He's a much better idea guy than a writing guy, in my opinion. I don't think you really read Stephen King for the prose. You read it for the ideas, for the story, for the vibes. It's not to say he's a bad writer. It's just very descriptive. You kind of feel like you're reading a screenplay. It's one reason I think it translates so well to movie and television adaptations, let's say. Start with The Gunslinger. I haven't read enough King to really tell you where to start. I did enjoy The Shining a lot. I think that's the only other King I've read. Wait, no, Sleeping Beauties he wrote with his son. You mean he doesn't execute his ideas well? Question mark, says Banana Man Fan 999. No, I mean just some authors could make anything, could write about any topic, but it would be super engaging just because they're so talented at writing. So like I feel that way about like Vladimir Nabokov, because a lot of his books are about topics that don't really interest me, or recurring ideas about Russian emigres to the United States and their perverse tendencies or things like that. But it's just so beautifully written that you're reading it almost like poetry. And I just don't, King doesn't have that capacity, and I don't even think he would say that. You know, I think he's a pretty modest guy when it comes to his writing ability. And I'm not saying this like I'm a talented creative writer or anything. The biggest weakness of this book for me was the writing, particularly of the central love story. But let's get into that. I suppose since did I ask? Yeah, did you read? 62% of you didn't read the book. Shame, boo. So I guess I'll start with explaining the plot of the book. Spoiler alert. Okay, I'm gonna kind of try to do this off the cuff. I didn't know Stephen King wrote beyond horror, not a horror fan, so never gave it a second thought. I mean, all his books have... I don't know if he's written a book that isn't horror or horror adjacent. I would say this is sort of a time travel love story as much as it is a horror novel. And I wish the ending had been more horrific, but I'll get into that in a few minutes. So 11/22/63 introduces you at the beginning to a recently divorced school teacher. His alcoholic wife just left him for some guy she met in AA. Just sort of sets the scene of seems like a decent, well-intentioned guy, school teacher, noble vocation, but doesn't have a lot of attachments in life or much going on. The book opens up with him reading essays by a class of adult students, including one really tragic story about a guy who was almost murdered, who saw his whole family murdered by his father when he was a young age, that impaired him for life. And he's just writing an essay about like, this is the day that changed my life. Anyway, our school teacher protagonist, Jake Epping, goes to this diner sometimes, Al's Diner. And Mr. Al sees our unattached, lonely school teacher guy and decides to rope him into something pretty insane. So in Al's Diner, in some back storage closet, if you walk into a corner of the room, you go down some invisible stairs and you pop out in... you enter a bit of a time slip or a wormhole, or as they sort of casually refer to it, a rabbit hole, where you just pop out into 1958. So you emerge in the same place, but at a different point in time, like 50 years in the past. So Al had been doing this to get meat for his diner. So, if you could go back in time, the first thing you're like, yeah, I'm going to get some cheap groceries. That's a sign of the affordability crisis, I guess, that we're going through right now. So Al, who had accidentally happened upon this, has been taking little vacations back to the 50s for fun, and also to get cheap beef, an endless supply of cheap beef, apparently, because the novel introduces us to some of the sort of rules of time travel according to this book. And this is one of the strengths of the book, is that it doesn't get held up on the rules of time travel. It would have been very easy for this book to get really bogged down in the sort of paradox of what it would mean to go back in time and interfere with things that would change you in the future, and how would that make sense in a circular kind of way, right? So at one point, when Al is explaining this to Jake Jake goes like, well, what if I go back in time and kill my own grandfather? And Al goes, why would you do that? It just sort of ends that conversation, which I think was a really clever way of just being like, we're not getting into the whole Back to the Future thing. What happens if I date my own mom? Weird conversation, you know? Let's not get too loopy with it. So anyway, Al's been going back in time to get cheap meat, but he said like, well, we have an opportunity here. We only pop out in one point in time, in the late 50s. So I got to thinking about what are some important historical moments that happen around this time that I would have an opportunity to change. And for Al, that watershed moment where you could improve history for the better would be to go to intervene and prevent the assassination of John F. Kennedy. President John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. And Al starts doing this, but when you pop out in time in 1958, that basically means that does mean you have to live in the past for several years before you get close to that date to be able to intervene and stop Oswald. This novel does, spoiler alert, this novel does sort of presume that Oswald acted alone, and it doesn't entertain or it doesn't confirm some sort of broader CIA conspiracy to murder the president. Problem is, the past doesn't want to be changed, and Al starts figuring this out, but I would say Jake really comes to realize this more and more throughout the novel, that Al gets lung cancer at some point. So he really comes back to the present more out of a sense of desperation of who else can I rope into this commitment I have to make this change. So for Jake, he saw Al 2 days ago, who seemed perfectly fine and healthy. But after Al spent, 3 years in the past getting progressively sicker, he comes back and looks like a much older and sicker man. Which, so Jake basically gets convinced of this opportunity to be a hero with this dying man's wish. But before he's convinced to say, okay, I'm going to commit to live in the past for years to save the president, he's like, I want to test how it works to go back in time to change something in the present. So one of the student at the very beginning we were introduced to, who had this horrific moment happen in his childhood, was on Halloween night, just a few months after you emerge in this time slip. One nugget of information I guess I forgot to add is when you go back in time, you could spend several years in the past, but if you come back through the time slip, to the present, it feels like you've only been gone 2 minutes, somewhere around 2 minutes. I feel like Jake got the shit end of the stick. He didn't get asked, he got forced because of his good guy morals. I mean, he could have said no. I think one thing I kind of like about the protagonist of this novel is that the further along it goes, the more he seems to indulge his own ego as being sort of the hero of the story. And I wish the novel felt a little bit more conscious of that he maybe wasn't a great guy. Only towards the end is there maybe a bit of a recognition of that as he's debating what to do at the very end. But yeah. Another thing about emerging in the past that Al doesn't really understand, but he tells Jake is, when you pop out back in the 50s, there's this drunk guy who seems to realizes you don't belong there. And he'll kind of yell at you and ask for money. And this conversation is very cyclical, but there's something weird about that. So if he asks you for money, just give it to him and he'll go to the liquor store and get a drink. But Jake's experience of going back in time is this guy's like, who are you? You don't belong here. He's calling him names he doesn't recognize. This is referred to as the yellow card man at the beginning of the novel, Only towards the end do we get a bit of an explanation of who that is. So yeah, so Jake's test of going back in time and changing the present is to try to go back in time and intervene to prevent this sort of more personal tragedy he is more aware of. So this first part of the book, let's say, is maybe the best part of the book. I would say the beginning and end of the book are the strongest sections. So the beginning section is Jake Epping first going back in time, trying to fit into life in the 50s, noticing all the things he loves about the 50s, how things taste and smell, the lack of regulation. There's good and bad things, you know, he's not personally affected by, but sees, you know, the sort of segregation and politics of the 50s. Anyway, this part of the book just feels very... It feels like it comes from a very nostalgic place. It makes me wonder, like, how old is Stephen King? Like, is he almost writing about the time he grew up in? Was King a child in the 50s? Because it definitely feels like someone writing from the perspective of almost a more idyllic time. If anything, it maybe doesn't quite do service to the reason things weren't great in the 50s, you know? But anyway, this section is very strong. Dark Swan Moon says 70. He's almost 80 now, so that means he was born in the 40s? Yeah, so if he was a teenager in the 50s, that would make a lot of sense, just in terms of the novel's feeling of the 50s. So yeah, he grew up and lived in those times. Jake's attempt to prevent his janitor friend in the present from being maimed and his family being killed takes him to Derry, which is where the events of one of King's best-known novels, It, takes place. It being the story about the kids facing off with the clown. I actually have not read that book or seen the modern remake of that movie. Maybe I should watch that. Maybe I should watch Stephen King's It next. And this section is very good. I'm not sure how I feel about King having such overt references to his other novels in this novel. It feels like this sort of meta fan service more than it really serves the point of the book. Maybe you like that his different books have this sort of connective tissue. I just don't think it did a whole lot to serve the story to have some references to a creepy clown exerting some evil influence on this town. It had so many weird over-the-top references to It and others. Yeah, some of the others I'm sure went over my head. There's like a few references to cars or some very little specific things. It almost felt to me like there's a bit... This is quite a tangent, but It has a very controversial scene in the book that I'm pretty certain wasn't in the movie, of the kids... these... I don't know how to explain this without it sounding... Basically, there's like the depiction of the kids from It all sort of being intimate in the sewer. And I think it's supposed to reflect that they're all sort of maturing and growing up and overcoming their fear of the clown. But for most people reading it, especially in retrospect, it's just like a really weird thing for King to have written about child characters. Yeah. In this novel, at one point, so Jake meets two of these kids, and he comments on how they have like an incredibly obvious special bond, loving bond between these young people. But he's like, how does he put it? He goes like, it almost feels romantic what these children have between them, but no, it's a different kind of love that like reflects something really deep, but something like people have gone through together or something. It almost feels like he's kind of apologizing for how crass and weird or how weird it got. Am I reading too much into that? It did feel like he was maybe acknowledging that a little bit. Anyway, we're in Derry. There's a clown lurking around. But this section, these few chapters in and of themselves could have been a really effective short story or writing exercise in and of themselves. But he intervenes in the father murdering the whole family. He's only sort of half effective in this. One of the kids still dies. He sees how much the past doesn't want to be changed. When he's on his way over to drive there, the car breaks down. Someone else intervenes. He gets robbed by another character. Like, nothing is going as he planned it. For months, he's just been thinking of stopping this one event this night from happening. And the past is resistant to change. But he just is just able to stop the father from murdering the family. And he comes back to the present, and Al is really on his deathbed and overdoses on pain pills that night, leaving him a note guilting him into doing it. But I guess that exercise with Jake, what happened is he comes back to the present and finds out that that person he cared about was not maimed by his father, and his family survived, but he actually survived to get drafted to go to the war at Vietnam and died the other way. So died another way. So he's not alive in the present anymore. So just sort of I wish the novel had maybe thought about this a little bit harder, in that both Al and Frank had examples of personal incidents that they tried to change in the past, and neither of them necessarily made the present better, even in a small way. Like, Al had stopped a kid from getting shot in a hunting accident, and when he came back to the present, yes, she wasn't in a hunting accident and wasn't in a wheelchair, but she seemed to be a way less accomplished person or member of her community. And here you have Frank going back in time and stopping this kid from having his family killed and being maimed. And he ends up dying in a war he was conscripted to, instead of growing up with the tragedy of losing his family. So, it at least introduces this idea, like, that even if you're well-intentioned, you're not necessarily changing things for the better. Who knows? It's the whole butterfly effect thing. But anyway, this experiment is at least enough for Jake to presume or assume that going back in time and stopping JFK from being assassinated would be a good thing, because maybe it would stop the war from Vietnam from ever happening. And this novel is clearly written from the perspective, or from a place of thinking a course of history where JFK was not killed would have been a better course of action for the United States. Hold on until the end, though, right? All right, now is sort of the beefiest part of the book, and I guess where people struggle the most with it is that the whole middle section of the novel is Jake. I think what's important is we see our protagonist, Jake Epping, who's going under the name George Amberson, an aspiring writer, gets a job as a school teacher, moves to Texas. I think the only really important thing about this middle section, I guess there's two big things, is that he's clearly falling in love with living a life in the late 1950s in a small town working at a school. Like, this feels like his reason for being. He excels at it. And he also falls in love with a girl. I've read some reviews of this book since finishing it this week, and I feel like a lot of the reviews hinge on the gender of the reviewer. I feel like a lot of men think this book is super great, and I think partly that's because the love interest in the book really indulges a sort of male fantasy angle of a love story, whereas I think a lot of women have trouble not rolling their eyes at the sort of love story that reveals itself here. Did the romance feel necessary? It is very necessary to the book, but it does feel like it's totally indulging a male fantasy, which I think would have been okay if the novel was sort of self-aware of this. So let me explain. Basically, Jake, who's faked his credentials, but fairly easily found himself in a teaching position at a high school in a small town in Texas, gets introduced to the new librarian there, who's described as this incredibly beautiful, slender, tall lady who, the first time he ever meets her, she stumbles into his arm and he accidentally grabs her by the boob. Like, this is a scene that's described very vividly and explicitly in the book. And a lot of the movie a lot of the book is about like how much he's into this girl. And I wonder, he's come from the year 2011, from a time where his wife left him for another man. And here he comes back to the 50s for this and finds this very attractive, totally inexperienced woman in a time where women are very subservient to their husbands or boyfriends, right? And I think it would have been a really interesting angle if the novel seemed more self-aware that maybe he was just in love with the idea of a trad wife. Then what I think the book is more trying to say is that he just happens to find the love of his life, transcending space and time. He just happens to find the love of his life in the 1950s in a small town in Texas. So Jake is at this time leaving like a real double life. He's in love with this girl. Loves being a school teacher, but he's also spending his free time basically spying on Lee Harvey Oswald in the years leading up to the Kennedy assassination. The book makes a pretty big deal out of him not wanting to just kill Lee Harvey Oswald years before the assassination, because they're unsure. Him and Al had discussed this. They're unsure if Oswald truly did act alone. So they had a bit of a plan to just observe Oswald in the years leading up to the assassination to try to confirm if he had acted alone in a prior shooting, or just see if they could find any evidence that no one else had helped him. Because if you kill Oswald in 1961, does that necessarily mean someone's not gonna carry out the plot 2 years later anyway? And this was sort of the least enjoyable part of the book. And I think it's partly because he's pretty miserable doing it. He's doing it out of a sense of duty, but he's living in a shitty apartment next to the Oswalds, listening into their conversations, and he's just miserable, and he clearly doesn't want to be doing this. And I guess I can yada my way to the ending, because the past doesn't want to be changed. He's been making his money by gambling on sports events that he knows the result to, but he does this in a little bit of a risky way and ends up with a bookie with mob affiliations basically almost beating him to death. So he ends up in the hospital with amnesia, wakes up shortly before the Kennedy assassination is supposed to happen, and is only slowly remembering what he has to do to intervene in the shooting from happening on the day. And because he's so weak and still recovering from a concussion and this temporary amnesia, his love interest, Sadie, is with him on the day of the assassination in Dallas, trying to stop Oswald from shooting the president. After a series of unfortunate events, they get to the book depository just in time to find Oswald there with his gun out the window, just about to shoot the president. They intervene. Oswald turns around, goes to shoot Jake. Jake stumbles over something, and predictably and obviously, Sadie gets killed here. I did skip over one important part. Sadie did have an ex-husband who did attempt to kill her during their time in Texas, which is important to know for reasons I might explain in a little bit. But anyway, they stop Oswald from assassinating the president, but the love of his life gets killed. So the police arrest him, the CIA are there, they sort of assume he has affiliations to other security agencies, but anyway, he finds his way back to the present. And he's already sort of made up in his mind that he's gonna go back again to sort of relive this timeline where Sadie can be alive, even if he decides he still wants to kill the president. But what's important is at this point, he comes back to the present, or he comes back to the time slip to come to the present. And that's where he runs into formerly the yellow card man, but like a different guy who's clearly serving the same function. So there's a guy just hanging around the time slip, or the rabbit hole they're coming in and out of. And this guy is like, oh my God, you've been changing so many things. Don't you know what you're doing? And we don't get like, I liked sort of the ambiguity here, but basically there are people in charge of, or tasked with the responsibility of trying to make sure people don't come back in time and change the past too much. And clearly by preventing the president from being assassinated, that is a big change of history that this guy is saying, hey, this is going to have terrible consequences, like go back to the present to see what happened, and you have to come back and reset it. Because how these time slips work is, if you go back in time, you can be there as long as you want, but you come back and it's only 2 minutes later. But as soon as you go back into the time slip to the past and go back to the present, it immediately resets. You're sort of changing the past and coming back to the future. You're resetting the future or present every time you go back to the past. So this guy explains in a sort of ambiguous way that these guys are sort of responsible for monitoring different places in the world where people can accidentally slip back in time or deliberately slip back in time, and that they are tasked with preventing people from doing that, or trying to correct how people are trying to change the past. And the reason that yellow card man at the beginning had lost his mind is because that he just became an alcoholic or a drunk trying to keep up with all the changes Al was making on his excursions back into the 50s. Even if he was mostly just trying to buy beef and change things, that guy just sort of lost his mind. And I do like it sort of hinted that by playing with time and going back in time, you will lose your mind a bit. So there are rules to the time travel. So there are rules to the time travel, but the novel doesn't get bogged down trying to over explain them. I would say, like, even this section, it's more important. What's important from this section or this explanation is that Jake is hearing it confirmed to him what he kind of already knew, and that is that changing the past can have sort of devastating consequences. And I guess what he's actually learning and hearing here is that the more he tries to change the past, the more he's potentially jeopardizing the future of the world and the stability of reality itself. So Jake goes back to 2011 to see what saving the president from being assassinated did. And what he finds is that the world is in a terrible place. And this is one of the more interesting parts of the book, is that King, I think, gave a lot of thought, and I think he mentions having spoken to historians about, like, what is the worst version of history that could happen if JFK had remained president, but everything else went horribly wrong. So we see an escalation of nuclear armament and war. We see these devastating natural disasters that have completely changed how the world looks. We have like nuclear reactors breaking down. Connecticut's now a part of Canada. People have all been exposed to radiation. Everyone's sick, and the world is just a totally bad, apocalyptic place. And so, yeah, we could have dwelled on this section more. I've seen some people who review the book be like, hey, this would be a much more interesting ending if this was just the present now and he didn't have an option. But this basically just leaves Jake with the decision of like, oh, okay, things are just terrible now. So of course my decision is to go back. So he goes back again, and he sees this the yellow card man who's now an ochre card man. And that guy's like, okay, good, you're back. Now go back to 2011 and close the circle to reset the way things should have been without you interfering with the past at all. And this is where the love story matters, yes, is that in this penultimate chapter, he is struggling to make the decision to go back to the present, because now that he's back in 1958, he has the opportunity to spend his life in the past with the woman he loves again. Or at least see her again, or at least be someone hanging around to make sure she's safe, right? And I wish this had been the end of the book. I feel like Stephen King doesn't always nail the endings to his stories. I think it would have been a great ending if he selfishly decided having this love affair or being in the life of this woman was more important than him potentially destroying the world. So that, and this second last chapter is really effective in that he's like, I bought a cup of coffee from a place, and he's like debating with himself, like, do we think that's bad enough that I might have made the future worse? When really all he wants to do is be able to be around this girl who he met in 1961 in Texas. But eventually this chapter sort of tragically concludes with him making the sacrifice that, no, I will go back to the present and accept that this woman I love so much will have to live a life without me, and I won't get the chance to live that life with her. So the novel really ends with him coming back to the present, and then it ends in the year 2012 with he's tried to avoid looking up much about her, but he looked her up at least well enough to know that she didn't get murdered by her ex-husband in the 60s, which in his timeline he kind of saved her from that happening. So he finds out she did live a long and fulfilling life, and he becomes a teacher in a new city, and he just happens to get a student who moved from that town. And he goes to, let's say he goes to this girl's like retirement get together, end of life thing. He travels to the small town in Texas. He can't help himself. And the novel ends with him meeting her in this timeline. He's a much younger man. She's lived a whole life, and she clearly sort of knows him. And this is actually one of the more interesting supernatural, let's say, elements of the novel, is that a few times throughout the book there's a few people that realize that he hasn't been from that place in time, and to them they almost ascribe a sort of like religious aspect to it, like, oh, you were like a good angel, a guardian angel sort of watching over from us, like you just knew something was going to happen and you came and you improved our time. But anyway, for Sadie, it's just like, it's that I know you in another life sort of thing. And they share this dance they used to do in the timeline where they lived together and lived well and loved each other for years. And it just ends with them sharing this dance. But really it's this sort of tragic, heroic ending, I guess you could say, of him sacrificing that love so as to not be at the expense of the world. Whereas the way better horror ending to the book would have been him making the selfish decision, I think, in my opinion. But it certainly indulges the sort of male ego hero complex that this book sort of suffers from. he's the great lover, he's the great guy trying to go through history and prevent this assassination, and he's the guy willing to make the sacrifice at the end for the sake of the world over his own selfish romantic interests. I think it would have been way more compelling and interesting in Grey if he had chosen selfishly. Would you be able to let simply go to save the world? That's a very personal question. And it's the kind of thing like no one, of course anyone can answer that question, but it's such a fantastical position to find yourself in. I don't think anyone knows what they would do unless they were actually in it. Is that a cop-out? I think you know it's true. Anyway, that took longer than I thought it would. But that is 11/22/63 in 20 minutes. I've been thinking about it since the book ended. I think it would be very hard not to make a selfish decision. And I think that's sort of the point of the book, is that as much as a lot of stories about time travel really entertain these more grand concepts of what point in history you might go back into to change humanity for the better, when I think people ultimately live pretty small lives and make decisions in their own self-interest. So even a simple question like, what point in time would you go back to if you could? Like, let's say you had a time machine and could go back to any point in history. Maybe you're just going to indulge some part of history you're very interested in. Maybe you're a better person than me and you have some idea of a point of history where you think you can make things better for humanity. I think a lot of people, if they're being honest with themselves, might choose something selfish, like being able to see a parent or relative or someone they loved and lost one more time. And I think the novel, to the extent that the novel works, I think it's because it sort of taps into that feeling that our own world of the people we know and love feels just as important as reality itself. Okay, what time would you go back to? If I could, well, I sort of already told on myself that I think I would pick something very selfish and personal rather than indulging like if I'm just giving sort of a more culturally if it's more just about like, hey, I'd love to have seen Bob Dylan perform in 1966 and see the sort of culture of that time, like, sure, that's also an easy answer to give. But I think the real answer is to, our more personal ones. Let's just leave it at that. As a woman of color, I've never been interested in traveling back in time unless I could go to Greek mythology and be Zeus. Well, that's asking a lot. I get the whole not wanting to go back in time, but to be Zeus, I mean, like, hey, come on now. We can't always get what we want. I do know that a criticism of this novel, I'm not sure if you read the book or not, it does sort of nod to segregation. Although it feels like it comes out of a place of obligation rather than wanting to really dig into that idea of the past. And King clearly, his politics he doesn't really hide his politics. Like, there's a lot of disdain for the politics of Texas in 1963. And in the afterword, I'm not sure if it's in this version of the novel or the audiobook, but he's pretty blunt that he thinks the politics of Texas in the 60s, or the South in general, were disgusting. Woo, so that was a book. what else did I write here? Oh yeah, so I guess in my opinion, a lot of the novel hinges on how much you believe the love story between Jake and Sadie. And I guess the conclusion I come to is that I believe it in the sense that Jake does love this sort of fantasy of being in love with the 1950s housewife. And he's able to live this sort of idyllic fantasy with her. Whether that makes it some unbelievable romantic story for the ages or not, maybe doesn't matter as much as you just really need to believe that this is a huge sacrifice for him. Like, does it matter if it's this truly cosmic love story that transcends time and space, or is it just the struggle of a guy making a sacrifice? And also just, there's a lot to like about this story. There's a lot to it. I really, even just the idea of someone finding themselves more comfortable in a different point in time, that alone is a very interesting idea to me. So yeah, I understand why people like this book. I like this book overall. How the love story is written, and specifically the sort of intimacy and sex scenes in this book, are some of the cringiest things I've ever read. But it actually made me think, like, I haven't read a lot of novels that are really like like, I haven't read romance novels. I've read books with love stories in them, but they don't seem to really focus on the love-making part of the love. I think it's just, it's got to be almost impossible to write love scenes that don't feel cringe. But these did feel especially uncomfortable to me. You know, like, they have this euphemism in the novel for, like, pound cake, for having, like, the whole thing is just very, very tough look. But I can't think of a male author who can write like a romantic scene. They have to be written by women. We kind of got into this on stream the other day. Like, I haven't read smut or romance novels, so I don't really know. And I think everyone has their own sort of taste of what works. But I think we can agree that the sex scenes in this book were pretty bad. Romance is different than sex. Yeah, I guess I'm just not being super explicit here. It really were, the sex scenes really did seem to indulge a sort of like male ego fantasy, which again kind of could work if that seemed to be intentional, or if there was some self-awareness about that. Like, the idea that so Sadie was married before, but her husband was a lunatic and she was still a virgin, even though she had been married. And the fact that this guy comes back from 2011 and woos her, and, you know, immediately she's just like super enjoying sex with it. Like, the whole thing just felt like, oh, okay, that's great. This guy's so great, right? Like, it just doesn't feel, nothing about it really felt honest. It felt too perfect. It felt too just satisfying this guy's ego. Yeah. Yeah, it's just, that whole part was just very male fantasy. Okay, I'm not the only one who feels this way, right? That's why it was so hard for him to let go. Yeah, I guess it's because he's kind of got the ultimate male fantasy, right? And I guess I've already said this, but yeah, I do think a strength of the novel is it's somewhat unique and not overly complex or it doesn't feel like it's burdened by trying to explain time travel too much. Which did make me sort of think about, JFK aside, I was thinking about, movies that this book reminded me of, and my head mostly went to, what are some movies that have done time travel in somewhat interesting ways? Because I do think this is an interesting way, right? It's you pop out at a specific point in time. You can't choose. You have to live in the past if you're waiting for a different point in history. And it resets every time you go back. The Yellow Card Men, like it was a creative way that didn't get too hung up on the details, like I've said a few times. Similarly, Arrival, one of my favorite movies. Most people don't think of this as a time travel movie, but in a lot of ways it is, in terms of the alien technology that gets revealed to our characters and the non-linear interpretation of time that gives them. Time Traveler's Wife is another sort of interesting one here. I've actually never seen it, but I'm aware of the concept of, I think it's a guy who doesn't have control over how he shifts in and out of time. And it's mostly about what the difficulty of having a relationship with anyone if you're not tied to a point in time, right? Click, one of Adam Sandler's best movies. The guy finds a remote, thinks it would be great to be able to fast forward through boring stuff and skip things, and then he finds he basically his life just disappears in front of him, My favorite movie ever is Predestination. I've seen that. That was a confusing movie. It gave me a bit of a headache. Groundhog Day. Bill Murray keeps waking up on the same day. It sounds like hell. Time is a flat circle. Nietzsche would like that movie. Edge of Tomorrow, one of Tom Cruise's best movies. Every time he dies, it resets the day. That's a fun movie. That's all I got. Did you watch What Dreams May Come? No. Why do I know? Is that not a baseball movie? It's Robin Williams' Afterlife. I haven't seen that. What Dreams May Come. Silly Munchkin says, what's the next book? Before I do that, for the 25% of you did read it, I'm going to give you only the option of thumbs up or thumbs down. Did you like 11, 22, 63? We're like Siskel and Ebert here, okay? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yay or nay? I'd be thumbs up despite the criticisms that I've already shared with you here. I was thinking Field of Dreams. Add it to the list. What's on my Letterboxd watch list right now? Last night we watched JFK for obvious reasons. Really good movie. I think for those of you who haven't seen it, it's Oliver Stone movie. Came out in 1991. And it is about the district attorney of New Orleans trying to litigate if there was a conspiracy to murder Kennedy. It very much indulges the idea that there was. I think a lot of people share an experience of seeing that movie when they're younger and more inclined to question authority in the government, I guess. And it feels very true and honest and an expression of rebellion against the elites or authoritarians. And as you get older, I think you're maybe more inclined to see the movie as a bit of an immature indulgence in and I think I've grown to see a lot of conspiracy theories this way, is that it comes from a place of just wanting to presume things happen for very clear reasons, and that people are always holding the strings when sometimes bad things just happen and there isn't some grand narrative or explanation or conspiracy. Sometimes one crazy idiot can just change the course of history. And it's kind of something you just realize as you get older too, just in terms of how you see people. Like when you're 16, let's say, you think of someone who's 38 and think that person is really an adult. And then one day you're going to wake up and you're going to be 38 and you're going to realize you don't feel nearly as adult as what you at 16 thought 38 years olds must be like. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean if you know what I mean. Listen to Beethoven right now. In terms of next books, next movies, I have not assigned a book for December. As I've already mentioned, I feel like I really dropped the ball on book club this year. I picked a few books I couldn't get through. I had a few things happen this year that made it hard to focus on books. Anyway, those are excuses. I would like to do a better job of picking books next year, picking them in advance, and then actually sticking to that. But I could use your help picking books, and I'm open to ideas as to how we pick books. I know someone's already suggested the idea of letting different people in the community nominate books. I feel like I'm open to a sort of democratic process, but I also don't want people to feel the pressure of individually suggesting books as well. I think I'd like to keep them pretty readable. This is a time of year where a lot of best of lists tend to come out. So I think my starting point will be looking at some recent releases that are getting buzz, maybe starting from there, as opposed to, you know, trying to knock off classics. Can someone drop the book club Discord, please? I guess that's another thing. So I've been talking about this a lot on the Bentendo Discord, which you even have to be a member of to, I mean, anyone can read it, but to make comments, you have to at least be a member, which I've tried to make as accessible as possible. I think you can still pay like $1 a month. It's just to filter out nonsense and spam. But I should, next year I will, or I can, post it on YouTube. So at least people who don't know or care about Discord would at least know what books we're planning on reading. What are your favorite genres? I'm more a fan of writing than any specific genres, let's say. Mark Carney reading list? Did Mark Carney come out with a reading list? That's pretty funny. So what was the list here? This was the list this year. Sun Also Rises by Hemingway I liked it. Bell Jar was very sad, but good. I didn't make it through Intermezzo. Life got in the way. Project Hail Mary was fun, although I'm not a huge fan of science-y science fiction. Animal Farm, just a short story. It's a classic, but it kind of didn't give us too much to chew on. I could not get through Dostoevsky here. And then we ended with 11/22/63. So not the most successful year. Where was Where's the list from last year? I feel like last year was strong, right? Crying in H Mart, great memoir. Extremely Online by Taylor Lorenz was not very good. Actually, we had some duds here as well. Didn't love Chain Gang All-Stars. Life of Pi was clever. Loved Infinite Jest, but I know that rubbed people the wrong way. Anxious Generation, also Batman. Even the year before was kind of rough too. Maybe I'm just being hard on myself. The year before, I think that first year started really strong with, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow. 100 Years of Solitude, Candy House, Jurassic Park, Vonnegut. This was a good year. Frankenstein, all of this was good. Handmaid's Tale, The Shining. Maybe I need more selections like this year. It almost alternated between, like, none of these are like stuffy classics. Maybe Dorian Gray a little bit. But like modern fiction, modern classic, modern fiction, modern classic, memoir, classic, horror, classic. I wonder what's the best way of nominating. I don't mind bad books. It's a shame when a book club pick is a do not finish, though. That's fair. And for that reason, I don't think I should be picking. It's one thing to pick like a very readable Stephen King 900-page book. Like, I found this book fairly easy to get through despite its length. I was sort of mixed because last year getting through Infinite Jest was important to me, and I felt really good about that. And I think I wanted that same thing to happen here with Crime and Punishment, or not Crime and Punishment, with Brothers Karamazov, and it just really didn't. Okay. I will figure out a way of putting out some sort of poll, but I also want to do some research myself on some. I think like that first year of mixing some modern current releases with more recent, more modern classics is a way of doing it. Can we do a short one for December? I think it's already November 23rd. I guess there is time to do one, but I'd rather start strong in January. Give people Christmas. Planet of the Apes. It would be fun to read Planet of the Apes. I'm always up for a book that has been turned into a movie. It's always nice to be able to do both. What's the next movie then? Good question. I'll consult with Uma. And again, with movies as well, maybe it would be smart to do more advanced scheduling of things. Are we watching something tonight? Someone mentioned a movie during this. I don't know. I'm not sure about tonight. We just watched a 3.5-hour movie last night, so maybe not. Wicked? Yeah, go see Wicked for good. I hear it's getting mixed reviews. Ha ha ha. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this book. Those of you who read it, 80% said thumbs up instead of thumbs down. So I'd take it. All right. Thanks for hanging out. I think I'll be streaming tomorrow. I've kind of gotten back into Peak. I beat the game on Ascent 6 the other day. So I feel I've got a bit of that itch of, can I beat the game on the hardest difficulty next? So that's kind of where my head's at. So if I'm streaming tomorrow, it would be to play Peak. Pluribus is a great show on Apple TV. Retrolix, I love the first episode. Second episode was good. Third episode is just sort of shopping for groceries, and I feel it's a little... I want to like it more than I am, in a way. Love the idea. Love the creator of the show. I feel maybe it thinks it's a little smarter than it is, in a way. If you know what I mean. But I'm definitely going to finish the season. Thank you to mods. Thank you for people who read. Thank you for the people who read books this year. Sorry if you read a book I didn't finish. I know that's not great. I will be interested in getting feedback for anyone who wants to offer it on... I'm going to nominate at least a few books and maybe some tentative picks, and maybe create a Google form or just use Discord to allow or invite your sort of nominations. Can I suggest watching Upload on Prime? Never heard of it. Is that the one where Justin Timberlake uses time as a currency, as a tattoo on his arm? All right, I'm going to go have dinner. Bye-bye.